we should certainly be very concerned about Russia. But what particularly bothers me is that we are so susceptible to about Putin's nuclear sabre-rattling basically deterred us from giving Ukraine the weapons and money that it needed at a time when it had a real chance of winning.
Well, the latest Coalition of the Willing meeting has come to an end, and we're expecting any moment to hear from leaders. The meeting between nations, including Britain and France, comes as Europe looks to clarify what security guarantees they can provide to Ukraine in the event of an end of the war with Russia. This week, NATO chief Mark Rutte raised expectations that this meeting would produce just such clarity. But will this just be another meeting of, as critics call it, the coalition of the waiting? Joining me now, Edward Lucas, Times columnist, consultant specialising in European and transatlantic security. Hello, Edward.
Hello, Danny.
Are you optimistic about this meeting and its outcomes?
I think that there will be some sort of outcome that will lead to backslapping among the people concerned, but I regard it with deep gloom because we are not dealing with the real problem, which is that we're scared of Russia. We're bored of the war in Ukraine, and we don't really know what to do about it.
So, a thrust of a lot of your very distinguished writing on this has been that we are scared of Russia. The question is whether we ought to be. Is that actually a rational reaction? Would not being scared of Russia be imprudent?
Russia's got the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world and has shown it's happy to attack other countries, and in fact indeed attacks this country from time to time, as we've seen with assassinations and sabotage and so on. So we should certainly be very concerned about Russia. But what particularly bothers me is that we are so susceptible to about Putin's nuclear sabre-rattling basically deterred us from giving Ukraine the weapons and money that it needed at a time when it had a real chance of winning. And the result is now that Ukraine is on the back foot, and Russia has largely been vindicated. They won't get.
I seem to have.
The West is divided and uncertain. We haven't been sanction them properly. We haven't been able to put them in diplomatic isolation, and they will get away with making with their land grab.
Well, we lost a little bit of that, but I think we gained the general thrust. So, should clarifying security guarantees be the priority for Europe at the moment? Do they present more of a target if they are given for Putin?
Well, they do present a target because if we say to the Russians, if you attack Ukraine, you're attacking us, and we will go to war to defend Ukraine and our people in Ukraine, that's a very big statement. And what we've done over the last 3.5 years has shown that we're really scared of confronting Russia. So I think that the big danger in this is that we put some sort of reassurance or tripwire force in Ukraine. Russia then comes back for second helpings, and we decide in the end we don't have the stomach for a fight. And the big victim of that is A, Ukraine, which will have another bite taken out of it, and B, our credibility, which will have more than a bite taken out of it. So if we're not willing to confront Russia, let's not pretend that we're going to. That is actually worse than if we did nothing.
Do you think President Trump has shifted in his position on Ukraine? Because it's a little bit difficult to tell. Sometimes he seems to be saying, Ukraine started this war, it should never have started, and he's making overtures to Putin. Sometimes he's cross with Putin because Putin seems to show disrespect or to appear on platforms with China. What do you think about Trump's position? Has it been shifting?
It's constantly shifting, but it never ends up in the place where it should be, which is to say that Europe is America's most important alliance and has been for decades. that Russia's attack on Ukraine is a profound strategic threat to the security of the whole Atlantic alliance, and it's in America's national interest to make sure that Russia loses this war. It's a bit like a pinball game where the ball bounces at all sorts of different positions. It never actually gets to the one that we want. And we see this extraordinary sort of we're playing bit parts in a reality TV show where our most important leaders go to the Oval Office as kind of extras on the set of Trump TV. But we don't get what we want. If we're lucky, we avoid disaster. Trump doesn't walk out of NATO. He doesn't completely cut off intelligence sharing for Ukraine. But this is not the Atlantic Alliance that's kept us safe and free for all our lives and for the lives of most of our parents. This is a kind of pale, shambolic imitation of the Atlantic Alliance. And the Europeans have to wake up and understand that and start building something themselves.
So do you think an alternative to NATO, really, that doesn't rely on US involvement, is that really practical given the proportion of Europe's security infrastructure that the United States represents?
It's certainly not practical in the short term, but we need to try and make it happen. And every gap we fill is one that will be very useful if we get into a real confrontation with Russia. But I mean, this country particularly is really stuck because both in terms of our nuclear weapons and in terms of intelligence, we are joined at the hip with America. It's a bit like Siamese twins having to have an argument when one Siamese twin is much smaller than the other. But there are things we can do, and we should get on and do them. And I feel there's still far too much hand-wringing and posturing going on, not nearly enough building of real capability and unity of the kind that might actually make Putin think that we're serious.
Well, thank you to Edward Lucas, Times columnist, and I really do recommend everyone to try to read Edward's columns when they appear because they very much illuminate the situation in Ukraine and in Europe in general.
We made some real progress today, a very important call with President Trump earlier on in relation to security guarantees, as Emmanuel has just set out. And as we've said all along, we, the coalition, stepping up, showing what we will do, the plans we've put forward, credible military plans, and alongside that, the backing of the US. So we stand ready as a coalition to support the meeting on Friday and everything that I hope can flow out of it. Nothing is obviously guaranteed, and as Emmanuel has said, and Friedrich has said, the President has agreed to debrief immediately afterwards so that we know what the next steps will be. But we're ready to support this, including through the plans that we've already drawn up to deploy a reassurance force once hostilities have ceased. And that's a long-standing principle of this group. And alongside that any talk about borders, diplomacy, ceasefire. Firstly, and obviously, there can be no negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine. And that's been a long-standing principle of this group. And I know Volodymyr is on the call and will be absolutely clear in relation to that. And along with that international borders cannot be and must not be changed by force. And again, that's a long-standing principle of this group. And alongside that any talk about borders, diplomacy, ceasefire has to sit alongside a robust and credible security guarantee to ensure that any peace, if there is peace, is lasting peace, and that Ukraine can defend its territorial integrity as part of any deal. And that's why this group was set up. That's why it's important we've all made the commitments that we have. Lasting peace in Ukraine. I think it's important that this group stays in. It is important to remind colleagues that we do stand ready also to increase pressure on Russia, particularly the economy, with sanctions and wider measures as may be necessary. You can see the effect of those measures already, and we in the UK are preparing our next package of strong sanctions in that regard. So I think it's important that we all continue to work alongside President Trump, alongside President Zelensky, and for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine.